The rain pounded mercilessly against Violet Carter's face as she raced through the night, her soaked dress clinging to her trembling body, each ragged breath burning in her lungs as she fled from the nightmare that had become her life. Behind her, the lights of Millbrook slowly faded into darkness, but the echoes of her husband's drunken rage still rang in her ears, drowning out even the thunder that crashed overhead. Colorado Territory, 1871. A harsh land of opportunity and broken dreams. Violet's swollen eye throbbed as she stumbled forward, one hand clutching her meager possessions wrapped in a cloth bundle, the other pressed protectively against her side where James had landed his final blow before she'd managed to escape. 6 months of marriage had taught her that the charming businessman she'd wed was nothing but a monster in gentleman's clothing. The muddy road stretched endlessly before her, illuminated only by occasional flashes of lightning. Each step took her farther from Millbrook, but with no destination in mind, just the desperate need to get away. Her father had warned her about marrying James, but she'd been too blinded by the prospect of security and respectability to listen. Another flash of lightning revealed a small homestead in the distance, a simple cabin with a faint light glowing in its window. Violet hesitated, fear and desperation warring within her. The storm was worsening, and she knew she couldn't survive a night exposed to the elements. With a silent prayer, she forced her aching legs to carry her toward the cabin. As she approached, she could make out a small barn and corral beside the modest home. A horse nickered softly from within the shelter of the barn. Gathering what little courage remained, Violet climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch and knocked weakly on the door. Long seconds passed before she heard movement inside. The door creaked open, revealing a tall man holding a lantern, his weathered face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. A revolver hung casually from his other hand. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep but gentle, with a hint of caution. "Please," Violet whispered, her voice breaking as tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. "I need help." Her legs finally gave way beneath her, and as darkness claimed her vision, she felt strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. When Violet awoke, she was lying on a narrow bed beneath warm blankets, her wet clothes replaced with an oversized shirt. Panic seized her for a moment until she realized she was alone in the room. A small fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across simple furnishings: a table with a basin of water, a trunk at the foot of the bed, and a chair where her now dried dress was draped. The door opened, and the man from earlier entered, carrying a steaming mug. Without his hat, she could see his face clearly, now strong-jawed with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a day's growth of beard. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way James had been, but there was something honest in his expression that made her breath catch. "You're awake," he said, approaching slowly as if afraid he might startle her. "I'm Rowan Hayes. This is my place." "Violet," she replied, her throat dry. "Violet Carter." He nodded and offered the mug. "Tea with honey. Might help with that throat." As she reached for it, her sleeve fell back, revealing the bruises circling her wrist. Rowan's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, simply placed the mug in her hands and stepped back. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the warm drink. I don't know how to repay your kindness." "No need for that," he said, settling into the chair. "Storm's still raging out there. You're welcome to stay till it passes." Violet nodded, sipping the tea to hide the fresh tears threatening to spill. The simple kindness this stranger showed was more than she'd received from her husband in months. "I hope you don't mind the shirt," Rowan added, a slight blush coloring his tanned cheeks. "Your dress was soaked through." I didn't look, just did what was necessary." "It's fine," Violet assured him, believing somehow that this man had behaved honorably. "I appreciate it." "You running from something, Mrs. Carter?" he asked after a moment of silence, his gaze steady but not accusatory. "My husband," she admitted, seeing no point in lying. "And it's Miss Carter now, as far as I'm concerned." Rowan nodded, understanding crossing his features. "Well, Miss Carter, you're safe here for as long as you need." In the days that followed, Violet learned that Rowan Hayes was a former cowhand who'd saved enough to buy a small piece of land 3 years earlier. He raised horses, breaking and training them for ranchers in the area, and kept a small herd of cattle. He lived alone, with occasional help from a young ranch hand named Tommy who came by twice a week. Violet insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and mending Rowan's clothes. Her bruises slowly faded, and with them, some of the fear that had become her constant companion. Rowan never pressed her for details about her past, but in the quiet evenings by the fire, she found herself sharing bits and pieces. "We married last winter," she told him one night as they sat drinking coffee after supper. James seemed so different than charming, attentive, the perfect gentleman. Rowan listened silently, his eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the hearth. "The first time he hit me was a month after the wedding. He apologized so sweetly afterward, promised it would never happen again." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I believed him, kept believing him every time." "Some men don't deserve the women they have," Rowan said quietly. "Your husband sounds like one of them." "Ex-husband," Violet corrected firmly. "I'm never going back." Rowan nodded. "Good." 2 weeks after her arrival, as they were finishing breakfast, a knock came at the door. Violet froze, her cup halfway to her lips, terror seizing her heart. "Stay here," Rowan said calmly, grabbing his revolver before approaching the door. Relief washed over Violet when she heard Tommy's cheerful voice greeting Rowan. The young ranch hand entered, shaking rain from his hat, then stopped short when he spotted Violet. "Madam," he greeted, removing his hat properly. His curious eyes darted between her and Rowan. "Tommy, this is Miss Carter," Rowan said simply. "She's staying here for a while." If Tommy thought anything improper about the arrangement, he kept it to himself, simply nodding and turning his attention to the day's work. But as he and Rowan headed to the barn, Violet couldn't help overhearing their conversation through the open window. "Folks in town are talking," Tommy said, "about a woman who ran off from Millbrook. Her husband's been asking around." Violet's blood ran cold. "That's so?" Rowan's voice remained neutral. "Yeah, offering a reward for information. Says she's unwell in the mind." A pause followed, then Rowan spoke again, his voice harder than Violet had ever heard it. "You planning to collect that reward, Tommy?" "No, sir." The boy sounded offended. "Just thought you should know. In case he comes this way." Later that evening, after Tommy had gone, Rowan found Violet packing her few belongings with shaking hands. "What are you doing?" he asked from the doorway. "I have to leave," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I won't bring trouble to your door after all you've done for me." Rowan crossed the room in 3 strides, gently taking the bundle from her hands. "You're not bringing trouble. You're running from it. There's a difference." "You don't understand," Violet insisted, finally looking up at him. "James has connections. If he finds me here, let him come," Rowan said simply. "This is my land. My rules." Something in his steady gaze made Violet believe him. Slowly, she nodded and unpacked her things. That night, unable to sleep, Violet found Rowan sitting on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the road that led to the property. Without a word, she sat beside him, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the cool night air. "You should be resting," he said softly. "So should you." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the chorus of night creatures and the occasional whicker from the horses in the barn. "Why are you doing this?" Violet finally asked. "Taking such risks for a stranger?" Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My sister," he said, "was married to a man like your James. She didn't run." He turned to look at Violet, pain etched in the lines around his eyes. "I buried her 4 years ago." Violet's hand found his in the darkness, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help her," Rowan continued. "But I can help you." In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection deeper than gratitude or obligation. Violet felt it like a physical thing, a tether binding her heart to his. As spring blossomed across the Colorado landscape, Violet found herself settling into life on Rowan's homestead. The fear of James finding her never completely disappeared, but it receded like a tide, leaving more room for other feelings to grow. She planted a small vegetable garden beside the cabin, tended to the chickens Rowan purchased from a neighboring farm, and even learned to ride the gentle mare he'd chosen specifically for her. Each day brought new discoveries about the land, about Rowan, and about herself. One evening in late April, they rode to a high meadow overlooking a winding creek. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of colors, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Rowan spread a blanket on the ground, and they shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Violet admitted as they watched the first stars appear. "Safe. Almost. Happy." Rowan's hand found hers, his calloused fingers rough against her skin. "You deserve happiness, Violet." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. "So do you, Rowan." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question more than a demand. Violet answered by leaning into him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as his arms encircled her waist. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their foreheads touching as they shared the same air. "I've wanted to do that since the second week you were here," Rowan confessed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Violet laughed softly. "I've wanted you to do that since the first time you called me Miss Carter instead of Mrs." Their return to the cabin that evening felt different, charged with possibility. That night, Violet moved from the small side room where she'd been sleeping to Rowan's bed, and in the quiet darkness, they discovered each other fully, their bodies speaking truths their words hadn't yet found. Afterward, lying in the circle of Rowan's arms, Violet felt tears slip from her eyes, not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of finding tenderness where she had only known cruelty. "I love you," Rowan whispered against her hair, and though the words should have frightened her, they instead felt like coming home. "I love you too," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The following weeks passed in a haze of happiness. They worked side by side during the day, Rowan breaking horses in the corral, while Violet tended to the garden and household, and spent their nights learning the language of each other's bodies. They spoke of the future in quiet moments, making plans for expanding the homestead, perhaps adding another room to the cabin. But their idyll couldn't last forever. James Carter arrived on a sweltering June afternoon, accompanied by the local sheriff. Violet was alone in the cabin, Rowan having ridden out that morning to deliver a trained horse to a ranch 5 miles away. The sound of approaching horses sent her heart racing, and one glance through the window confirmed her worst fears. James looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in his tailored suit, his blonde hair neatly combed beneath his hat. But now she could see the coldness in his eyes that she'd once mistaken for intensity. "Violet," he called, his voice carrying that false concern she'd come to dread. "Thank God we've found you, darling. I've been so worried." The sheriff dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Carter, your husband's been searching for you for quite some time." Violet stepped onto the porch, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach, where the first signs of new life had recently made themselves known, a secret she and Rowan had only just begun to celebrate. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, ignoring James completely. "I left my husband voluntarily. I'm not missing or lost." James dismounted, approaching the porch with open arms. "Violet, sweetheart, you're not well." The doctor explained everything, how your female hysteria might cause these episodes. "I'm perfectly well," Violet stated firmly, keeping her distance. "And I'm not going anywhere with you, James." The sheriff shifted awkwardly. "Madam, legally speaking, a wife belongs with her husband." She said she's not going. Rowan's voice came from behind them. He'd approached silently, leading his horse, his expression dangerously calm as he tied the animal to the hitching post and moved to stand beside Violet. James's face darkened. "And who might you be?" "Rowan Hayes." "This is my property you're standing on." The sheriff nodded in recognition. "Hayes, didn't realize this was your place." "Well, now you do," Rowan said evenly. "And Miss Carter is here as my guest. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." James's face contorted with rage. "Your guest? Is that what you call it when you steal another man's wife?" "I didn't steal anything," Rowan replied. "She ran from you. I just gave her somewhere safe to land." James turned to the sheriff. "You hear that? He admits she's here against my wishes. I want her returned to me immediately, and this." Cowboy arrested for abduction. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Carter, without evidence of force, evidence." James interrupted, gesturing wildly at Violet. "Look at her, living in sin with this man, disgracing herself and my good name." "The only disgrace," Violet said clearly, is what you did to me." She unbuttoned her sleeve and rolled it up, revealing a long, jagged scar that ran from her wrist halfway up her forearm. "This is from the time you pushed me through a glass door, James. Shall I show the sheriff the burn marks on my back? Or perhaps describe how you held my head underwater in the bathtub until I nearly drowned?" The sheriff's expression hardened as he turned to look at James with new eyes. "She's lying," James said quickly. "She did that to herself during one of her episodes. She's not right in the head." "I'm perfectly sane," Violet countered. "And I have witnesses in Millbrook who saw my injuries. Mrs. Peterson at the general store, Dr. Wallace, who treated me more than once." The sheriff studied her face, then James's, then Rowan's. After a long moment, he sighed. "Mr. Carter, I can't force a woman to return to a situation she claims is dangerous. Not without a court order, which you don't have. This is outrageous." James exploded. "She is my wife, and if you want to pursue that legally, you're welcome to do so through the proper channels," the sheriff replied evenly. "But today, I'm not taking her anywhere against her will." James turned his fury on Violet. "You ungrateful whore. I gave you everything: a fine home, beautiful clothes, respectability, and this is how you repay me? By running off with some dirt-poor horsebreaker?" Rowan's hand tightened on Violet's shoulder, but she placed her own over it, keeping him steady. "You gave me pain and fear," she said calmly. "Rowan gave me safety and love. There's no comparison." James lunged forward suddenly, reaching for Violet, but Rowan was faster, stepping between them and shoving James backward with enough force to send him stumbling. "That's enough," the sheriff intervened, placing himself between the two men. "Mr. Carter, I suggest you return to town. File whatever legal paperwork you feel is necessary." For a moment, it seemed James might argue further, but something in the sheriff's stance made him reconsider. With a last venomous look at Violet, he remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he warned. "I'll be back with a court order, and then we'll see who's lying." They watched in tense silence as James rode away, the sheriff following at a more measured pace after tipping his hat apologetically to Violet and Rowan. When they were alone again, Violet's legs finally gave way, and she sank onto the porch steps, trembling violently. Rowan knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "He'll be back," she whispered. "I know," Rowan agreed. "But we'll be ready." That evening, after a mostly silent dinner, Rowan surprised Violet by producing a small box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for a week," he admitted, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "I was waiting for the right moment, but after today, I don't want to wait anymore." Violet's eyes filled with tears as Rowan took her hand. "I know you're still legally tied to him," he said quietly. "But in my heart, in this house, I want you as my wife, Violet. I want our child to have my name." Her hand flew to her stomach. "You knew?" A gentle smile crossed his face. "I suspected. The way you've been glowing lately. The extra biscuits at breakfast." Violet laughed through her tears. "I thought I was being subtle." "Not to someone who loves you," Rowan replied, his expression growing serious again. "I can't offer you wealth or a fancy house in town, but I can promise you'll never fear my touch or my temper. I can promise our child will know only love, never pain." "Yes," Violet whispered, pulling him close. "1,000 times yes." They were married 2 days later by a circuit preacher who didn't ask too many questions about Violet's previous marriage. The ceremony was simple, just the two of them, Tommy, and an elderly couple who lived on the neighboring homestead as witnesses. Violet wore a blue dress Rowan had purchased from the general store, and he wore his only clean shirt and a new pair of trousers. They both knew the marriage might not stand up legally until Violet's divorce from James was finalized, but in their hearts, they were husband and wife the moment they spoke their vows beneath the cottonwood tree behind their cabin. Summer faded into autumn, and Violet's body changed with the seasons, her belly growing round with the life inside her. They heard through Tommy that James had indeed filed legal papers, but the process was moving slowly, complicated by the distances involved and the territorial court's backlog of cases. In late September, just as the aspen leaves were turning gold, a letter arrived from the sheriff. James Carter had been killed in a saloon brawl in Denver, where he'd gone on business. The fight had apparently started over a gambling debt. Violet felt nothing but a strange, hollow relief. The specter that had haunted her for months was gone, and with it, the last obstacle to her future with Rowan. As winter settled over the Colorado highlands, blanketing their small homestead in snow, Violet and Rowan prepared for the arrival of their child. They converted the side room into a nursery, with a cradle Rowan crafted from pine and a colorful quilt pieced together by the neighbor woman who'd stood witness at their wedding. On a frigid January night, with snow piling against the cabin walls and the wind howling like a wounded animal, Violet's labor began. Rowan rode through the blizzard to fetch the midwife from a nearby ranch, returning just as Violet's pains intensified. For 16 hours, Violet battled to bring their child into the world, Rowan never leaving her side despite the midwife's attempts to shoo him from the room. When their daughter finally arrived, her lusty cries filling the cabin, Rowan wept unashamedly, cradling the tiny red-faced infant as if she were made of the most fragile glass. "Rose," Violet whispered, watching her husband and daughter together. "Rose Hayes." Rowan nodded, his throat too tight for words as he carefully placed their daughter in Violet's arms. Spring came again, bringing with it Rose's first smiles and the expansion of their homestead. With the money Violet unexpectedly inherited as James's legal widow, they purchased additional acreage and built a larger, more comfortable home adjacent to the original cabin. Rowan's horse business flourished, his reputation for fair dealing and quality animals spreading throughout the territory. On Rose's first birthday, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching the sunset, Violet leaned against Rowan's shoulder, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her lap. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, taking in a crying, broken woman that rainy night. Rowan's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment. Even with all the trouble I brought with me, especially because of that," he said, turning to kiss her temple. "Because it brought us here, to this." Rose stirred in Violet's lap, her tiny face scrunching before relaxing again into sleep, one small fist clutching her mother's dress. "I never thought I'd know this kind of happiness," Violet admitted, gazing down at their daughter. "After James, I thought I was broken beyond repair." "Not broken," Rowan corrected gently, "just bent a little. And strong enough to straighten yourself back up again." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, a family forged from pain and courage, their future stretching before them like the vast Colorado sky, full of promise and possibility. By Rose's 5th birthday, the Hayes Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Rowan's breeding program produced horses sought after throughout the territory, and Violet had established a small but thriving business selling preserves and baked goods to the general store in town. 2 more children had joined their family, 3-year-old Samuel and 1-year-old Emma, filling their home with laughter and the sweet chaos of young lives. On a warm evening in the summer of 1877, as they celebrated their 6th wedding anniversary with a picnic in the same meadow where they'd first kissed, Violet watched Rowan chasing their children through the wildflowers, their squeals of delight echoing across the valley. "Catch me, Papa," Rose called, her dark hair so like her father's streaming behind her as she ran. "I'm going to get you." Rowan growled playfully, scooping up Emma with one arm while reaching for Rose with the other. Samuel toddled after them, determined not to be left out, his chubby legs working hard to keep up. Violet sat on the blanket, her hand absently touching the small scar on her forearm, the last visible reminder of her life before Rowan. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this, she still marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from that rain-soaked night when she'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate hope for something better. Rowan caught her watching and smiled, that same smile that had first made her feel safe all those years ago. With the children clinging to him like monkeys on a tree, he made his way back to the blanket and collapsed dramatically beside her, the little ones giggling as they piled on top of him. "I think I'm outnumbered," he complained good-naturedly. "Hopelessly," Violet agreed, leaning down to kiss him despite the children's theatrical groans of disgust. Later, after the children had fallen asleep in a puppy pile on the blanket, Rowan and Violet sat with their shoulders touching, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" Violet asked. "When I asked why you were helping me?" Rowan nodded. "About my sister. I've been thinking about her today," Violet said softly. about how her story led to ours, in a way. Rowan was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. She would have liked you, he finally said, and she would have adored these little rascals. Violet rested her head on his shoulder. I wish I could have known her. In a way, you do, Rowan replied. Every time you stand your ground. Every time you choose love over fear. That's who she was, at her core. Violet turned her face up to his, overwhelmed as always by the depth of understanding in his eyes. I love you, Rowan Hayes. More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow. His kiss was as tender as the first they'd shared in this very meadow, his hands as gentle on her face as they'd always been. When they parted, his smile held all the warmth of the summer day. And I love you, Violet Hayes, he whispered against her lips. The woman who fled in tears and found the courage to build a new life. My wife, the mother of my children, my heart. Around them, the Colorado wilderness stretched in all directions, wild and beautiful and sometimes dangerous, much like life itself. But here, in this small circle of family they'd created together, there was only love, hard-won and fiercely protected. And for Violet, who had once known only pain at the hands of the man who'd vowed to cherish her, that love was the greatest miracle of all.